The flames consumed Vincent Dalton's ranch house with such ferocity that the night sky turned orange for miles around, and he stood there with soot-stained hands hanging useless at his sides, watching 20 years of his life turn to ash and ember. The year was 1882, and San Elizario, Texas, had seen its share of hardship. But nothing had prepared Vincent for the sight of everything he owned disappearing into smoke, while the September wind howled like a demon laughing at his misfortune. He had built that ranch from nothing, every board laid by his own hands, every fence post driven into the unforgiving earth with sweat and determination. And now it was gone. The cattle had scattered when the fire started, probably spooked halfway to El Paso by now, and his barn had collapsed an hour ago, taking with it his tools, his saddles, and the last photograph he had of his parents. He was 34 years old and felt like he had aged a decade in a single night. Elena Garrett stood at the edge of the firelight, her dark hair whipping around her face, and watched Vincent with an expression that would have broken a weaker man's heart completely. She had ridden out from town the moment she saw the glow on the horizon, knowing without being told that it was his place burning. They had been courting for nearly 6 months now, ever since she had arrived in San Elizario to help her cousin run the general store. And in that time, she had come to know Vincent as a man of quiet strength and honest ambition. He never spoke much about his dreams, but she had seen them in the way he talked about expanding his herd, about building a proper house with a second story and glass windows, about creating something lasting in this harsh territory. Now those dreams were literal ashes floating on the desert wind. The fire finally burned itself out around dawn, leaving nothing but the stone chimney standing like a grave marker over the ruins. Vincent had not moved in hours, and Elena had stayed with him through it all, not speaking, just present. When the sun broke over the horizon, painting the devastation in shades of gold and gray, she finally walked up beside him and took his hand. His skin was rough and calloused, the hand of a working man, and she held it firmly. "It is all gone," Vincent said, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. "Every damn thing I worked for. The house, the barn, my savings were hidden in a strongbox under the floorboards. I've got nothing left, Elena. Nothing." She turned to face him, and the expression on her face was not pity, but something far more powerful. Her eyes, the color of honey in the morning light, held a determination that surprised him. "You have got yourself," she said. "You have got your hands and your knowledge and your strength, and you have got me if you will take me." Vincent looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since the fire started. She was 26 years old, with a face that might have been called pretty in a conventional sense if not for the intelligence and steel in her expression that made her something more than merely pretty. She wore a simple cotton dress that was now covered in ash and dirt from sitting on the ground all night, and her hair had come loose from its pins, but she stood there like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Elena, you do not understand," he said, pulling his hand away and gesturing at the ruins. "I have got nothing to offer you now. I was going to ask you to marry me next month after the cattle sale, when I had enough money to give you a proper wedding and a proper home. But now, I cannot even offer you a roof over your head. I am starting from less than nothing. I am in debt for the land payments, and without the cattle money, I will lose the property too. You should go back to town and forget about me. Find yourself a man who can actually provide for you." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with defeat. Elena let them settle for a moment, then she stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw. "Vincent Dalton, you listen to me and you listen well. I did not ride out here in the middle of the night because I cared about your house or your cattle or your money. I came because I care about you. And if you think I am the kind of woman who runs when things get hard, then you do not know me at all." "Elena, no, let me finish," she interrupted, her voice rising with passion. "I came to San Elizario 6 months ago because I needed a fresh start. My father drank himself to death and left my mother with nothing but debts. I watched her work herself into an early grave trying to keep us fed. I swore I would never be helpless like that, never let my happiness depend on things that could be taken away. What I feel for you is not about your ranch or your prospects. It is about who you are, the man I have come to know. And that man is still standing here, is he not?" Vincent felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from more pain. "I do not deserve you," he said quietly. "That is not for you to decide," Elena replied. She reached up and touched his face, her palm cool against his heated skin. "We will rebuild this dream together from ashes. That is what we will do. We will start over, side by side, and we will make something even better than what was here before." He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the hardship he knew was coming, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She was not offering him charity or pity. She was offering him partnership, and there was a kind of fierce joy in her expression that he had never seen before. "It will be hard," he warned. "Harder than you can imagine." "I grew up hard," Elena said simply. "I am not afraid of work. Are you?" Despite everything, despite the ruins smoking behind them and the uncertain future ahead, Vincent felt the corner of his mouth twitch into something that might have been a smile. "No, madam, I am not." "Then we have got all we need," she said, and she went up on her toes and kissed him, right there in the ashes of his old life, and it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. They walked back to town together as the sun climbed higher, leading Vincent's horse that had been tied far enough from the fire to stay safe. Elena had ridden out bareback on a borrowed mare in her haste, and now they took turns riding while the other walked. The 6 miles to San Elizario gave them time to talk, really talk, about what came next. Vincent's mind was clearer now, the shock of the fire giving way to the practical considerations of survival. "I need to round up what cattle I can find," he said as they walked. "Some of them might have stayed together, maybe holed up in the canyon to the north. If I can gather even half the herd, I might be able to make a partial payment on the land and buy myself some time." Elena nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. "How much time do you have before the payment is due?" 6 weeks, Vincent said grimly. "I owe $300. The cattle sale was supposed to bring in $500, enough for the payment and supplies to get through winter." "And how many cattle do you need to sell to make $300? Vincent did the math in his head, factoring in the current market prices in El Paso. "About 40 head if I can get them there in good condition. But that is the problem. I have got no supplies for a cattle drive, no money to hire drovers, and no equipment. My saddle burned, my ropes burned, even my damn bedroll is gone. And I need to keep some cattle to rebuild the herd, or I will have nothing come spring." They crested a small rise and San Elizario came into view, a collection of adobe buildings huddled along the Rio Grande. The town had seen better days. It had been a thriving community once, the county seat, but a violent election dispute 4 years earlier had left scars that still showed. Many families had left, and those who remained tended to be the stubborn ones, the ones with nowhere else to go or nothing left to lose. Vincent had always felt a kinship with the town in that regard. "My cousin owes me wages," Elena said suddenly. 3 months of wages that she has been promising to pay when business picked up. I can press her for it, at least part of it. That might buy some basic supplies." Vincent stopped walking and turned to her. "Elena, no, I cannot take your money. "It is not taking if I am giving," she countered. "And besides, you said we are doing this together. That means what is mine is ours to use as we see fit, unless you do not mean what you said about wanting me as your partner." He recognized the trap in her words and had to admire her for it. "You are going to be a handful, are you not?" "You have no idea," she said with the first real smile he had seen from her that morning. "Now stop being stubborn and let me help. We will get your cattle rounded up, we will make the payment, and then we will figure out what comes after that." They reached town by mid-morning, drawing curious stares from the few people out and about. News of the fire had not spread yet, but Vincent's appearance told its own story. His clothes were blackened with soot, his face streaked with ash and sweat, and he carried himself with the heaviness of a man who had lost everything. Elena kept her hand on his arm as they walked down the main street, a gesture of solidarity that did not go unnoticed. They went first to the general store where Elena worked and lived in a small room in the back. Her cousin, Margaret, was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who ran her business with an iron fist and a careful eye on every penny. She looked up from the counter when they entered and her eyes widened at their appearance. "Merciful heavens, Elena, what happened to you too? Vincent's ranch burned down last night," Elena said without preamble. "Everything is gone. I need the wages you owe me, Margaret, all of it." Margaret's eyes flickered between them, calculation and concern warring on her face. "Elena, you know business has been slow. I do not have that kind of cash on hand right now." "You have been saying that for 3 months," Elena said, her voice hard. "But I see you bought new inventory last week. I see you had money to pay the freight. I need $45, Margaret. That is what you owe me for 3 months of work, and I need it now." The two women stared at each other across the counter, and Vincent could see the family resemblance in their stubborn jaws and unflinching gazes. Finally, Margaret sighed and went to the cash box. She counted out bills and coins with visible reluctance, and when she handed the money to Elena, her expression was sour. "I suppose you will be quitting to play house with your cowboy now," Margaret said. "No," Elena replied, surprising both Margaret and Vincent. "I will be working double shifts until we get back on our feet. I will need the income and you need the help with winter inventory coming. But I will not be living here anymore. I will be living at the ranch site with Vincent." Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "People will talk, Elena. An unmarried woman living with a man." "Then we will not be unmarried," Elena said calmly and turned to Vincent. "Father Diego can marry us this afternoon if we ask him, unless you have objections." Vincent felt like the ground had tilted under his feet. This morning he had lost everything, and now this extraordinary woman was standing in a general store proposing marriage to him with $45 in her hand and soot on her face. "Elena, this is not how I wanted to do this. You deserve better than a rushed wedding because people might gossip. What I deserve is a partner who stops worrying about what I deserve and starts letting me make my own choices," Elena said firmly. "Do you want to marry me or not, Vincent Dalton?" He thought about all the proper speeches he had planned, about the ring he had been saving to buy, about the romantic proposal he had imagined. Then he looked at Elena's face, at the strength and certainty there, and realized that this moment was more real and honest than any planned proposal could have been. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I do want to marry you." "Good," she said, and turned back to Margaret. "We will need witnesses for the ceremony. Will you come?" Margaret looked completely befuddled, but she nodded slowly. "I suppose I will, though I think you have both lost your minds." "Probably," Elena agreed cheerfully, "but at least we will be crazy together." They left the store with Elena's wages and a list of essential supplies that Vincent wrote out with a borrowed pencil. He knew they had to be strategic about every purchase. Rope, a basic saddle, some cooking gear, beans and flour and coffee. Everything else was luxury they could not afford. While Elena went to find Father Diego and arrange the wedding, Vincent headed to the livery stable to see about borrowing some equipment. Tom Patterson ran the livery, a grizzled man in his 60s who had known Vincent since the younger man first arrived in San Elizario 8 years ago. He listened to Vincent's story with a weathered face that showed little emotion, but his eyes were sympathetic. "That is a hell of a thing, son. You got any idea how the fire started?" "Lightning, I think," Vincent said. "We had that dry storm roll through last evening. I was out checking the fence line when I saw the smoke. By the time I got back, the house was already engulfed." Tom nodded slowly, chewing on a piece of straw. "You are lucky you were not inside sleeping. Could have been a lot worse." "Could have been better too," Vincent said with a trace of dark humor. "Tom, I need to ask for help, and I hate doing it, but I have got no choice. I need to borrow a saddle and some tack for about 2 weeks. I will pay you back after I sell the cattle." "If you can find them," Tom said, but not unkindly. He walked to the back of the stable and returned with a worn but serviceable saddle and a coiled rope. "This belonged to my son. He is not using it anymore." Vincent knew that Tom's son had died in a ranch accident 5 years ago, kicked in the head by a horse. The fact that Tom was willing to lend his dead son's equipment was not lost on him. "I will take good care of it," he said quietly. "I give you my word." "I know you will," Tom said. He paused, then added, "I heard you and the Garrett girl are getting hitched this afternoon." News traveled fast in a small town. Vincent nodded. "That is right. She is standing by me through all this." "She is a good woman," Tom said. "Smart, too. You are lucky to have her." "I know it," Vincent said. He hefted the saddle over his shoulder and shook Tom's hand. "Thank you, Tom. I mean it." "Just get yourself back on your feet," Tom said. "And when you do, remember who your friends are." The words stayed with Vincent as he walked to the small Catholic church at the edge of town. The message was clear. The community would help him now, but he had an obligation to repay that help when he could, and to pass it forward when others needed it. That was how people survived in this country, by building networks of mutual obligation and support. He had been proud and self-sufficient for so long, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Father Diego was a small man with a gentle face and hands that always seemed to be moving, gesturing as he talked or counting prayer beads or turning the pages of his worn Bible. He greeted Vincent at the church door with genuine warmth and immediate agreement to perform the wedding ceremony. "Elena has already explained the situation," the priest said in his accented English. "I think it is good what you are doing, building a life together from nothing. That is what marriage is, yes. 2 people choosing to face the world as one." They held the wedding in the small church, as the afternoon sun streamed through the simple windows. Margaret attended as promised, along with Tom Patterson and a few other townspeople who had heard the news and wanted to show support. Elena wore the same dress she had worn to the fire, now brushed clean of the worst of the ash, and she had washed her face and pinned her hair up properly. She carried no flowers, and there was no music, but when she walked down the short aisle to stand beside Vincent, her face shone with such happiness that he felt his throat tighten. Father Diego kept the ceremony simple and brief. They exchanged vows in voices that were steady despite the emotion behind them, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. Vincent had no ring to give her, and that embarrassed him, but Elena did not seem to care. When Father Diego pronounced them husband and wife, and told Vincent he could kiss his bride, Vincent cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her with all the gratitude and hope he could not put into words. The small gathering clapped, and Margaret surprised them both by hugging Elena tightly. You make sure he treats you right," she whispered loud enough for Vincent to hear. "And if he does not, you come back to town and I will box his ears." "I will treat her right," Vincent said. "You have my word on that." They walked out of the church into the golden afternoon light as husband and wife, and Vincent felt the strangeness of it, the way his life had been completely upended in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, he had been a bachelor rancher with a decent spread and solid prospects. Today, he was a married man with nothing but debts and ashes. Yet somehow, with Elena's hand in his, the future felt less terrifying than it had that morning. They spent what was left of the day buying supplies and preparing for the cattle roundup. Elena proved to have a sharp eye for value, haggling with merchants to stretch their limited funds as far as possible. She bought them a second-hand canvas tarp that could serve as a temporary shelter, a cast iron pot, basic foodstuffs, and 2 good ropes. She also insisted on buying a small bag of peppermint candies, which seemed frivolous until she explained that it was important to have something sweet, something that was just for pleasure, even in hard times. As evening approached, they rode out to the ranch site together, Elena seated in front of Vincent on his horse since they could not afford a second mount. She fit against him perfectly, and he found himself acutely aware of her warmth, her scent, the way her hair tickled his chin. They were married now, truly married, and tonight would be their wedding night. Under any other circumstances, the thought would have filled him with nothing but anticipation. Now it was complicated by the fact that they had no house, no bed, and nowhere private to go. Elena seemed to sense his thoughts. "We will make do," she said quietly as they rode. "We have got the tarp and blankets. It is warm enough to sleep outside. And Vincent, I do not need fancy or comfortable. I just need you." Her words helped, but he still felt the weight of inadequacy. This was supposed to be a special night, and instead they would be camping in the ruins of his failed dreams. When they reached the ranch site, the smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. The chimney stood like a sentinel over the blackened remains of the house, and in the fading light, the devastation looked even worse than it had that morning. But Elena did not waste time on despair. She slid down from the horse and immediately began looking for a good spot to set up their camp. She chose a location upwind of the ruins, near where the old oak tree provided some shelter. Together they strung up the tarp between the tree and some stakes. Vincent drove into the ground, creating a simple lean-to that would protect them from dew and provide some sense of enclosure. Elena spread out the blankets while Vincent tended to the horse and built a small fire. They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread that Elena cooked in their new pot, sitting close together on a blanket and watching the stars emerge overhead. The vastness of the Texas sky was one of the things Vincent had always loved about this land, the sense that anything was possible under such an infinite expanse. Tonight, the stars seemed like witnesses to their new beginning. "Tell me about when you first came here," Elena said as they ate. "You never talk much about your past." Vincent was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I was 26 when I arrived in San Elizario. I had been working cattle drives up from Mexico, sleeping on the ground and eating dust for months at a time. I saved every penny I made until I had enough to buy this land. It was cheap because of the trouble the town had been through and because the land is hard. But I saw potential here, water access from the river, decent grazing in the bottomlands, and room to grow." He paused, staring into the fire. "I built that house board by board. It took me nearly a year, working every daylight hour. When I finally slept in it for the first time in a real bed under a real roof that I had built with my own hands, I felt like I had accomplished something important, like I had proven I was worth something." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "You are worth something, more than any house or ranch. You know that, do not you?" "I am starting to," Vincent said. He turned to look at his wife, and felt wonder at the word. "Elena, I need you to know something. I may have lost the house, but I did not lose the land. The property is still mine, or it will be if I can make the payment. And whatever we build here, it will be ours together. Not mine, ours. I want you to know that." She lifted her head and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I know that. That is why I stayed." The kiss deepened, and Vincent felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, to the warmth of her mouth, and the feel of her body pressed against his. They made love that night under the stars, under the tarp shelter in their makeshift camp. And it was awkward and tender and more meaningful than any wedding night in a fancy hotel could have been. Afterward, they lay wrapped in blankets with Elena's head on Vincent's chest, his arms around her, and talked in whispers about their plans for the coming weeks. "Tomorrow I start looking for the cattle," Vincent said. "I will ride out at first light and cover the northern range. You should stay in town, keep working at the store. We need that income." "I will work at the store during the day," Elena agreed, "but I will come out here every evening to help you with whatever needs doing. And on Sunday, which is my day off, I will ride with you to search for cattle. I am a decent rider, Vincent, and an extra set of eyes will help." He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the hard work ahead, but he was learning that Elena did not want or need that kind of protection. "All right," he said instead. "We will do it together." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together against the chill of the desert night, and Vincent slept more soundly than he had any right to, considering his circumstances. He woke at dawn to find Elena already up and rekindling the fire, her hair loose around her shoulders and her feet bare in the dust. She looked over at him and smiled, and in that moment, watching his wife tend their campfire in the shadow of his burned ranch, Vincent felt something he had not felt since the fire started: hope. The next 2 weeks became a test of endurance and determination that pushed both of them to their limits. Vincent spent his days searching for scattered cattle, riding through canyons and scrubland under the relentless Texas sun. He found them in small groups, sometimes alone, scattered across the landscape by their panic. Each cow found was a small victory, each one gathered another step toward saving the ranch. He drove them into a makeshift pen he built using salvaged materials and rope, working until his hands bled and his body ached with exhaustion. Elena kept her word about working double duty. She spent long hours at the store, helping Margaret with inventory and customers, then rode out to the ranch site each evening. She brought food she had cooked in town, news and gossip that kept Vincent connected to the community, and her own indomitable energy. She insisted on helping with the heavy work despite his objections, and proved herself capable beyond what he had expected. She could rope a calf, mend a fence, and cook a decent meal over an open fire. More than that, she could make him laugh when everything seemed hopeless, and hold him when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. They developed a rhythm to their days, a partnership that felt natural despite the circumstances. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk about the future, about the house they would build and the life they would create. Elena had ideas about everything, from the layout of the new house to what crops they might grow alongside the cattle. Her vision expanded his own, made him think beyond simple survival to actual prosperity. "We should plant an orchard," she said one evening as they lay under the stars. "Pecan trees. They grow well here and the nuts sell for good money. It would take a few years before they produce, but it would give us another income stream." Vincent traced patterns on her arm with his finger, marveling at how quickly he had become accustomed to her presence, to the intimacy of marriage. "Where did you learn about pecan trees?" My mother had 2 trees in our yard when I was a girl, Elena said. Before we lost the house. She used to make pecan pies that tasted like heaven. I always thought if I ever had my own land, I would plant an orchard. Then we will plant an orchard, Vincent said simply. When we have the money for saplings, that is one of the first things we will do. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. You mean that, do not you? You really see me as a partner in all of this. I could not do this without you, Vincent said honestly. You know that, do not you? Without your money, without your work, without you keeping my spirits up when I wanted to give up, I would have lost everything by now. You are not just my wife, Elena. You are my equal in this venture. I want you to always know that. She kissed him then, deep and passionate, and their conversation ended as it often did these days, with them coming together under the blanket, their bodies learning each other with increasing familiarity and joy. The physical intimacy had become another language between them, a way of communicating love and need and hope when words were not enough. By the end of the second week, Vincent had gathered 37 head of cattle. It was fewer than he had hoped, but more than he had feared. He had also heard from some of the neighboring ranchers that they had seen some of his stock mixed in with their herds. 2 of them returned a total of 6 more cows out of neighborly duty, bringing his total to 43 head. It was enough to make the land payment if he got a fair price at market, but there would be nothing left over. The night before he was scheduled to drive the cattle to El Paso, Vincent and Elena did calculations by firelight, figuring and refiguring the numbers to see if there was any way to keep more of the herd. But the math was unforgiving. He needed to sell at least 40 head to guarantee he would have enough for the payment, even if prices were on the lower end of average. It will leave us only 3 cows to rebuild from, Vincent said, frustration evident in his voice. That is not enough to run a ranch. It will take years to build back up to a decent herd size. Elena chewed on her lower lip, thinking, what if I asked Margaret for an advance on future wages? If we could come up with even $50 more, you could keep a few more head. Elena, you have already done so much. I cannot ask you to. You are not asking, I am offering, she interrupted. And before you start being stubborn about it, think practically. Those extra cows will breed. By this time next year, we could have calves to sell. That is worth more than my wages in the long run. She was right, and Vincent knew it, but it still rankled his pride to have his wife solving his financial problems. He was supposed to be the provider, the strong one. But he was learning that strength came in many forms, and that accepting help was not the same as being weak. All right, he said finally. But I want you to keep track of every penny you invest in this ranch. When we start turning a profit, you get paid back first. I want that understood. Fine, Elena said, though her smile suggested she had no intention of actually collecting on that debt. I will talk to Margaret tomorrow. The cattle drive to El Paso was a brutal 3-day journey through heat and dust with only Vincent and one hired hand, a young man named Sam who Tom Patterson recommended. They moved the small herd slowly to keep them from losing weight, camping at night and taking turns on watch to prevent any cattle from wandering off. Vincent had made the drive many times before, but it felt different now, weighted with more significance. This was not just a cattle sale. This was the difference between keeping his land and losing everything for good. El Paso was a bustling town compared to San Elizario, full of saloons and stockyards and men looking to make deals. Vincent met with several buyers before settling on a price that was fair if not generous, $320 for 40 head. It was enough for the land payment with a little left over for supplies. He paid Sam his wages, then made the long ride back to San Elizario with the money in a belt under his shirt and 3 cows trailing behind on a lead. Elena was waiting for him when he arrived back at the ranch site, and the smile on her face when she saw him was brighter than the setting sun. She ran to meet him, and he dismounted and caught her in his arms, spinning her around. "We did it," he said. "We made the payment. The land is ours." She laughed and kissed him hard. "I never doubted we would. How much do we have left?" $20 after I pay Tom back for the equipment loan," Vincent said. "Plus Margaret gave you that advance, $50, Elena confirmed. "So we have $70 total, plus 3 cows and whatever we can salvage from the ruins." It did not sound like much, but to Vincent it felt like a fortune. It was a foundation, however small, to build from. They spent that evening celebrating their small victory with a special meal Elena had prepared, using some of their limited funds to buy a chicken and fresh vegetables. They ate like royalty under their tarp shelter, and afterward made love with the enthusiasm of people who had survived the worst and come out stronger. The next phase of their rebuilding began the following week. Vincent spent his days working as a hired hand for neighboring ranchers, taking any job that paid, from mending fences to breaking horses. It was hard on his pride to work for wages on someone else's land, but the money was necessary. Elena continued at the store while also starting to clear the burned debris from the house site. She worked in the evenings and on her days off, sorting through the ashes for anything salvageable, and slowly creating a clean space where a new structure could be built. She found small treasures in the ruins: nails that could be straightened and reused, hinges that had survived the heat, the strong box Vincent had mentioned, warped and blackened but intact. When she pried it open with a crowbar, they discovered that the leather bag containing Vincent's savings had protected most of the money from the worst of the fire. The bills were scorched and brittle, but still recognizable as legal tender. It was $73, far less than the $200 Vincent thought he had hidden, but $73 more than they expected to have. "The bank will probably take these," Elena said, carefully handling the damaged bills. "They look bad, but you can still read the denominations." Vincent stared at the burned money in his wife's hands and felt emotion well up in his chest. "I thought it was all gone," he said hoarsely. "I saw the floor collapse and figured the strongbox melted." "It takes a lot of heat to melt iron," Elena said practically, but her eyes were bright with tears too. "Vincent, this changes things. We can start building sooner than we thought, maybe even before winter." They took the damaged money to the bank in El Paso the following week, and after some examination, the bank manager agreed to exchange it for new bills minus a small handling fee. They walked out with $68 in crisp new currency, and Vincent felt like they had been given a miracle. With their increased funds, they began to plan the new house in earnest. Vincent sketched designs in the dirt while Elena critiqued and suggested changes. They debated about size and layout, about where to position it for best light and wind protection, about whether to build with adobe like most of the local structures or to spend more for lumber. Finally, they compromised on a design that would use adobe for the walls and lumber for the roof and framing, combining the best of both approaches. "It should be bigger than the old house," Elena insisted. "2 rooms at least, maybe 3. I know it will cost more, but we need space to grow." "Space to grow," Vincent repeated and looked at his wife with a question in his eyes. She flushed slightly but met his gaze steadily. "I am not with child yet, if that is what you are asking, but I hope to be someday. And when that happens, I want our children to have proper bedrooms, not just a curtain dividing one big room." The thought of children, of Elena carrying his baby, filled Vincent with a fierce protectiveness and joy he had never experienced before. "Then we will build a house big enough for a family," he said. however long it takes. They began construction in late October when the worst of the summer heat had passed, and the air held the first hints of the cooler weather to come. Vincent did most of the heavy work himself, but he hired help for the specialized tasks like mixing and laying the adobe bricks. Elena worked alongside him whenever she was not at the store, learning to mix mortar and lay brick with a determination that sometimes made Vincent laugh. "You are getting mortar in your hair," he said one afternoon, reaching over to brush a smear of mud from her temple. "So are you," she retorted, and deliberately smudged a bit of mortar on his nose in revenge. They ended up in a playful fight that left them both covered in adobe mud and laughing like children. It was moments like this that reminded Vincent how lucky he was, how easily things could have gone differently. If Elena had been a different kind of woman, one who valued comfort and security over adventure and partnership, she would have left him that first day. Instead, she had stayed and fought beside him, and together, they were creating something new from the ruins of what had been lost. The house took shape slowly through November and into December. The walls rose up square and solid, and Vincent felt immense satisfaction watching them grow. This house was different from the first one. That had been built by a young man trying to prove himself, built quickly and without much thought to aesthetics or comfort. This house was being built by a married man with a partner, and every decision was made with both their input. Elena insisted on larger windows than were strictly practical, saying she wanted light and air. Vincent insisted on a sturdy root cellar, saying they needed proper food storage. They compromised and negotiated and sometimes argued, but always they agreed in the end. The townspeople helped in small ways throughout the construction. Tom Patterson donated some lumber from his own supply. Margaret provided nails at cost. Father Diego organized a work party one Sunday where half the town showed up to help raise the roof beams, turning a week-long job into a single day of community effort. It reminded Vincent that he was not alone in this, that the bonds of community were as strong as any rope or nail. By Christmas, the house was habitable if not finished. It had 4 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace and kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small room that could serve as an office or storage. The floors were packed earth that would eventually be covered with wood planks, and the walls were bare adobe that would eventually be plastered and whitewashed. But it was solid and warm and theirs. They moved in on Christmas Eve, carrying their meager possessions from the camp to the house in a single trip. Elena had made curtains for the windows from flour sacks she had carefully washed and dyed, and she hung them with obvious pride. They had no furniture yet except for a table and 2 chairs that Vincent had built from scrap lumber. But Elena set that table with their tin plates and cups, and the jar of wildflowers she had picked, making it look like a feast. "Merry Christmas, husband," she said, and handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Vincent was embarrassed because he had nothing for her. All their money had gone into the house and supplies. But when he opened the package, he found a new pair of leather work gloves, sturdy and well made, and he knew they had cost Elena more than they could afford. "Elena, you should not have spent money on this. Your hands were getting torn up," she said simply. "I could not stand watching you work with your skin split and bleeding. Besides, a wife is allowed to buy her husband a Christmas gift. Now put them on and tell me if they fit." They fit perfectly, and Vincent wore them for years afterward, long after they were patched and repatched and barely holding together. But that night, he just pulled his wife close and held her, wishing he had something to give her in return, some way to show her how much her faith in him meant. "You have given me everything I need," Elena said, as if reading his thoughts. "You have given me a home and a partnership and a future. That is more than most women ever get. They spent their first night in the new house wrapped in blankets on the floor of their bedroom because they did not have a bed yet. But it was warm and dry and protected, and after months of living under a tarp, it felt like luxury. They made love slowly and tenderly, christening their new home with their bodies, and Vincent thought that no palace in the world could have provided a better wedding night than this one, earned through sweat and sacrifice. The new year brought new challenges and new opportunities. Vincent's 3 cows were due to calve in the spring, and he was already planning how to expand the herd. He took every job he could find, working brutal hours to earn money for supplies and livestock. Elena continued at the store while also starting a small vegetable garden behind the house, planting seeds she had been saving and nurturing them with carefully rationed water. In February, Elena missed her monthly courses and began to suspect what she hardly dared hope. She waited another month to be sure, and when her suspicions were confirmed, she told Vincent one evening as they sat by their fireplace after a long day of work. "I am with child," she said simply, her hand on her still flat stomach. "The baby should come sometime in October, I think." Vincent felt his heart nearly stop, then start again with a painful lurch. "Are you sure? Are you well? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I am sure I am well, and I will see a doctor when we can afford it," Elena said with a smile. "But Vincent, I need you to understand something. I am going to keep working and helping with the ranch. I am pregnant, not sick. My mother worked until the day I was born, and so will I." He wanted to wrap her in cotton and protect her from every hardship, but he knew that would insult her independence. "All right," he said carefully. "But if the work becomes too hard, if you need to rest, you have to promise to tell me." "I promise," she said, and then she laughed at the expression on his face. "Vincent, you look terrified. It is just a baby." "It is our baby," he said, and pulled her into his arms. "Our child, Elena. We are going to be parents." The reality of it settled over them both, and they sat together in the firelight, talking in hushed voices about names and futures and all the possibilities that lay ahead. Vincent had never allowed himself to think much about having children, had never felt stable enough to consider it seriously. Now it was happening, ready or not, and the thought filled him with equal parts terror and joy. The pregnancy changed some things but not others. Elena did keep working, though Margaret eventually insisted she take more breaks and do less heavy lifting. At the ranch, Vincent took over the tasks that required climbing or heavy hauling, but Elena still worked in the garden and helped with the lighter chores. Her body changed gradually, her belly swelling with the growing life inside her, and Vincent found himself fascinated by the transformation. He would lie with his hand on her stomach in the evenings, feeling the baby kick and move, marveling at the miracle of it. "He is strong," he would say. "Feel that kick. He is going to be a fighter," Elena would correct. "And of course she is strong. Look at her parents." They argued playfully about the baby's gender, both convinced they were right, and made lists of names for both possibilities. Vincent liked traditional names, strong and simple. Elena preferred names with meaning, names that told a story. They compromised on a short list that satisfied both of them, but privately each was certain they would not need half of those names. The spring calves arrived in April, 3 healthy babies that nearly doubled their herd. Vincent spent sleepless nights helping with difficult births and protecting the vulnerable calves from predators. Each successful birth felt like a victory, another step toward rebuilding what had been lost. By summer, they had 6 cattle plus the 3 calves, and Vincent was able to buy 2 more cows with money he had saved from his hired work. It was not a large herd, but it was growing, and that was what mattered. The ranch was coming back to life in other ways too. Elena's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables that improved their diet and reduced their food costs. They planted the pecan saplings Elena had wanted, 6 young trees positioned in 2 rows behind the house. They would not produce for years, but the act of planting them was an act of faith in the future, a statement that they were here to stay. As summer gave way to fall, Elena's pregnancy advanced into its final stages. She was large and uncomfortable, her energy flagging earlier each day, but she maintained her good humor and her determination to stay active. Vincent worried constantly, hovering over her in a way that made her laugh and scold him in equal measure. "I am fine," she would insist. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. This is natural." "That does not mean it is not dangerous," Vincent would counter. "Things can go wrong, Elena. I need you to be careful." She would soften then and touch his face. "I am being careful, but I also need to live my life. This baby is a blessing, not a curse. We are supposed to be happy about this, remember." He was happy, deliriously so, but the happiness was tinged with fear. He had lost so much in his life, had watched his dreams burn to ash just a year ago. The thought of losing Elena or the baby was more than he could bear. He found himself praying more than he ever had, making bargains with God in his head, promising anything if his wife and child could just be safe. Elena went into labor on a crisp October morning, a year and a month after the fire that had changed their lives. Vincent had been expecting it. They both had. But when her water broke and the contractions began, he still felt panic surge through him. He rode to town at a gallop to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in the county. Mrs. Henderson took one look at Elena and nodded approvingly. "Good strong labor, starting nice and regular. This should be straightforward. But you," she pointed at Vincent, "need to stay out of my way. Go boil some water, tear some clean cloth for rags, and stop looking like you are going to faint." Vincent did as he was told, but he stayed close, unable to leave even when Mrs. Henderson shooed him out of the bedroom. He could hear Elena laboring, hear the sounds of her pain, and it tore at him. He paced the main room like a caged animal, starting at every cry, feeling utterly helpless. Margaret had come with Mrs. Henderson to help, and she took pity on Vincent's obvious distress. "She is strong," Margaret said. "Elena has never done anything halfway in her life. She will get through this." The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. As the sun set and the room filled with shadows, Vincent lit every lamp and candle they owned, as if enough light could somehow protect his wife. Finally, as full dark fell outside, he heard a new sound, the sharp, angry cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom with a bundle in her arms and a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with a good set of lungs, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but fine." Vincent felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can I see them? Give us a few more minutes to clean up, then you can come in," Mrs. Henderson said. She handed the baby to Margaret and returned to the bedroom. Those minutes felt like hours, but finally Mrs. Henderson called him in. Elena was propped up in their bed, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced creature with a tuft of dark hair, wrapped in a blanket Elena had sewn herself during her pregnancy. "Meet your son," Elena said, her voice tired but full of joy. "Meet Victor Dalton." Vincent approached slowly, almost afraid to get too close, as if the scene might shatter like glass if he moved too quickly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. The infant's eyes were squeezed shut, his tiny fists waving in the air, his mouth open as he made small mewling sounds. He was perfect. "Victor," Vincent repeated, testing the name. They had chosen it together, a name that meant winner, conqueror, someone who overcame. It seemed fitting for a child born from such adversity. "Hello, Victor. I am your father." The baby did not respond except to yawn, and Elena laughed softly. "He does not seem very impressed." "He will be," Vincent said. He reached out one rough, calloused finger, and the baby's tiny hand immediately wrapped around it with surprising strength. The touch sent a wave of emotion through Vincent so powerful that his eyes filled with tears. "He will know, Elena. He will know what you sacrificed for him, what you gave up. He will know the story of how we started from nothing and built this life. He will know he was wanted and loved," Elena said firmly. "That is the most important part. The rest is just details." They sat together like that for a long time, the three of them, while Mrs. Henderson and Margaret finished cleaning up and left them to their privacy. Vincent could not stop staring at his son, at this tiny human they had created together. A year ago, his life had been ashes. Now he had a wife he loved beyond measure, a home they had built together, a ranch that was slowly growing, and a son. It was more than he had ever dared dream. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful, and sometimes overwhelming. Victor was a healthy baby with strong lungs and definite opinions about when he wanted to eat, which seemed to be constantly. Elena recovered quickly from the birth and dove into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She figured out how to nurse the baby while also managing household tasks, how to sleep in snatches between feedings, how to interpret the different types of cries that Victor produced. Vincent felt more useless during this time than he had since the fire. There was little he could do to help with an infant beyond basic tasks, and he threw himself into ranch work to compensate. He took on extra jobs, pushed himself harder, trying to build their savings and expand the herd. He was driven by a need to provide, to prove himself worthy of the family Elena had given him. But Elena noticed his excessive hours and pulled him back. "Victor needs his father," she said one evening when Vincent came home late for the third night in a row. "Not just as a provider, but as a presence. I need you too, Vincent. We are partners, remember. That does not mean you work yourself to death while I handle everything else." He realized she was right. He had been falling into old patterns, trying to shoulder all the responsibility himself instead of truly sharing it. He adjusted his schedule, making sure he was home for supper each evening, making time to hold his son and help with the endless tasks that an infant required. He learned to change soiled cloths, though he never got good at it, and to rock Victor to sleep when the baby was fussy. Those moments of holding his son, walking the floor at midnight while Victor cried himself to exhaustion, became some of Vincent's most treasured memories. In the quiet darkness, with just the two of them awake, he would talk to the baby in a low voice, telling him stories about the ranch and the family's history, and the mother who had stayed when any reasonable person would have left. "Your mother is the strongest person I know," Vincent would whisper to the baby. "When I lost everything, when I had nothing to offer her, she stayed. She said we would rebuild this dream together from ashes, and she kept that promise, Victor. Everything you see, everything we have, exists because she refused to give up. I want you to remember that. I want you to know what kind of woman your mother is." Elena heard him sometimes, these midnight speeches, though Vincent did not know it. She would lie in bed pretending to sleep, listening to her husband's voice in the darkness, and feel her heart swell with love for this man who had been so broken and had become so strong. The seasons turned, and Victor grew from infant to baby to toddler with alarming speed. By his first birthday, he was crawling everywhere and pulling himself up on furniture, determined to walk before he was ready. The ranch grew too, slowly but steadily. Vincent's herd expanded to 20 head, then 30. He built a proper barn to replace the one that had burned, and a chicken coop, and a smokehouse. Elena's garden produced enough vegetables to sell the surplus at market, providing a small but steady income stream. They were not wealthy, not even close, but they were stable. The land was paid off. The house was finished and furnished with furniture Vincent built in the evenings, and they had money saved for emergencies. It was security of a kind that Vincent had never experienced before, and he treasured it. On the second anniversary of the fire, Vincent and Elena stood together at the spot where the old house had been. The chimney was gone now, torn down and the stones reused in the new fireplace. The only sign that a building had once stood there was a slight depression in the ground and some darker soil where ash had enriched the earth. "You ever miss the old house?" Elena asked, holding Victor on her hip. The boy was nearly 18 months old now, walking and talking in simple sentences, full of energy and curiosity. "No," Vincent said honestly. "I thought I would. I thought losing it would haunt me forever. But the truth is that house was never really a home. It was just a building I lived in. This," he gestured at the ranch spread before them, at the new house and the barn and the neat rows of pecan trees, at the cattle grazing in the distance. "This is home. Because you are here, because Victor is here, because we built it together." Elena leaned against him, and Victor babbled something incomprehensible, pointing at a bird flying overhead. "We should plant some flowers here," Elena said, indicating the depression where the old house had stood. "Wildflowers, something native that will come back every year. A reminder of where we started." "That is a good idea," Vincent agreed. He took Victor from Elena and lifted the boy onto his shoulders, making him giggle with delight. "What do you think, Victor? Should we plant some flowers? Flowers?" Victor shouted enthusiastically, though he probably had no idea what he was agreeing to. They planted the wildflower seeds the following week, scattering them liberally over the old house site. Elena chose a mix of varieties: Indian paintbrush, bluebonnets, black-eyed Susans, prairie verbena. They watered them carefully and waited for spring. When the flowers finally bloomed, they created a riot of color where once there had been only ash and loss, and Elena declared it the most beautiful garden on the ranch. The years that followed brought more changes, more growth, more challenges overcome. Elena gave birth to a daughter 3 years after Victor, a tiny girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah, and she was different from Victor from the start, quieter, more observant, with a calm temperament that balanced her brother's wildness. Another son followed 2 years later, named Henry after Vincent's father, and then finally another daughter they called Rose. The house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Vincent built an addition that gave each child their own small bedroom. It was cramped by some standards, but to him, it was perfect. He had grown up sharing a room with 3 brothers in a house that leaked when it rained, and he had sworn his own children would have better. They did. The ranch prospered too. Vincent's cattle operation grew large enough that he could hire hands during busy seasons. Elena's pecan orchard began producing after 5 years, just as she had predicted, and the nuts sold well in El Paso and even as far as San Antonio. They diversified further, adding pigs and chickens and even a small dairy cow. Elena's business sense proved as sharp as her determination, and she managed the ranch's finances with careful precision, always saving a portion of each year's profits against future hardship. They became respected members of the community. Vincent served on the town council and helped organize the new schoolhouse when Santa Lazario finally got a proper teacher. Elena worked with Father Diego to establish a charity fund for families in need, remembering how the community had helped them in their darkest time. They paid their debts forward, as Tom Patterson had suggested all those years ago, and built networks of friendship and mutual support that enriched their lives beyond mere financial success. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Elena by taking her to El Paso for a weekend, leaving the children with Margaret. It was the first time they had been alone together since Victor was born, and the novelty of it felt strange. They stayed in a real hotel with a proper bed and ate in a restaurant where someone else did the cooking. They walked the streets hand in hand, window shopping and talking without interruption for the first time in years. "I never thanked you properly," Vincent said as they sat on a bench watching the sunset over the Rio Grande. "For staying, for not giving up on me when you had every reason to." Elena looked at him with surprise. "Vincent, you have thanked me 1,000 times over." "You do not need to keep bringing it up." "Yes, I do," he said seriously, "because I need you to understand what it meant. Elena, I was broken that day. Not just financially, but in my spirit. I had failed, and I could not see past that failure to any kind of future. But you could. You saw possibilities where I saw only ashes. And you were right. Everything we have, everything we have built, it started with you refusing to let me give up. I need you to know that I understand that. I need you to know that I never take it for granted." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes bright with emotion. "Do you want to know the truth? I was terrified that day. Absolutely terrified. I had feelings for you, strong feelings, but we had only been courting 6 months. I did not know if those feelings were enough to build a life on. But when I saw you standing there in front of that fire, looking so lost, I knew I could not walk away. It was not courage that made me stay, Vincent. It was love. I loved you already, even though it was probably too soon and definitely impractical. I loved you, and I could not leave you to face that alone." Vincent took her hand and brought it to his lips. "Best decision either of us ever made." "Well, marrying you is a close second," Elena said with a smile. "But yes, staying was definitely the right choice." They returned to the ranch the next day, back to their noisy, chaotic, beloved life with 4 children and endless responsibilities. But something had shifted slightly. Some understanding deepened. They had needed that time to remember who they were beyond parents and ranchers and community members. They were Vincent and Elena, husband and wife, partners who had chosen each other and continued to choose each other every day. The children grew, as children do, with alarming speed. Victor became a skilled horseman and a capable ranch hand, serious and hardworking like his father, but with a quick sense of humor that came from his mother. Sarah was quieter but no less determined, with a gift for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch accounts. Henry was the wild one, always getting into trouble, always pushing boundaries, keeping his parents on their toes. And Rose, the baby, was charming and clever and utterly fearless, wrapped around her father's heart from the day she was born. There were hard times mixed in with the good. A drought year when water was scarce, and they had to sell off part of the herd to survive. An outbreak of illness that swept through the town, taking several lives before running its course. A border dispute with a neighboring rancher that nearly came to violence before cooler heads prevailed. But each challenge was met and overcome, and the family emerged stronger each time. Vincent was 49 years old when Victor announced his intention to marry a local girl named Catherine. The news hit Vincent with unexpected force, a reminder that time was passing, that his children were becoming adults with lives of their own. He sat on the porch that evening with Elena beside him, watching the sunset and feeling oddly melancholy. "He is too young," Vincent said. 20 is too young to get married. You were younger, Elena pointed out. And besides, he is not too young. He is ready. Can you not see it? Vincent could see it, which was the problem. His son had become a man when he was not paying attention, capable and confident and ready to start his own life. "Where does the time go?" he asked softly. "Forward," Elena said simply. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "Always forward. We cannot hold on to them forever, Vincent. We can only hope we raise them well enough to make good choices." "We did," Vincent said with certainty. "You did. They are good people, Elena, all of them, strong and kind and capable. That is your doing." "It is our doing," she corrected. "We did it together, remember? Just like everything else." Victor and Catherine were married in the spring of 1897 in a ceremony at the church presided over by Father Diego, who was older now but no less energetic. The whole town attended, and Vincent found himself thinking about his own wedding 15 years earlier. The rushed ceremony with so few witnesses, born out of desperation and determination. Victor's wedding was different, joyous and celebratory, with a feast afterward and dancing that went late into the night. It was what a wedding should be, and Vincent was glad his son could have that. The newlyweds built a small house on the far end of the ranch property, and Victor continued to work the land with his father. The arrangement worked well, expanding their operation without requiring them to hire outside help. Catherine proved to be a hard worker and a good match for Victor, and when she announced she was expecting a baby 8 months after the wedding, Elena was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. "We are getting old," Vincent said when Elena told him the news. "We are getting older," she corrected. "There is a difference, and I for one am looking forward to spoiling grandchildren without having to do all the hard work of raising them." Vincent's first grandchild was born in the summer of 1898, a boy named Thomas. Holding that tiny baby, seeing his son become a father, Vincent felt the circle of life in a way he never had before. This child was the future, part of a legacy that stretched back to that terrible night, when everything burned and forward to possibilities Vincent could only imagine. Sarah married 2 years later, choosing a schoolteacher named Robert who was patient and kind and adored her. Henry left the ranch to seek adventure, joining a cattle outfit that worked the northern ranges, promising to return but needing to see the world first. Rose, the youngest, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to attend normal school in El Paso and become a teacher herself. "When did she get so ambitious?" Vincent asked Elena as they discussed Rose's plans. "She has always been ambitious," Elena replied. "You just did not see it because she was clever enough to get what she wanted without making a fuss about it. She is the most like me, that one." Vincent laughed because it was true. Rose had inherited Elena's determination and strategic mind, along with her father's stubbornness. She would make an excellent teacher, and Vincent was proud even as he mourned the loss of his baby girl's childhood. The turn of the century came and went, marked by celebrations and reflections on how much the world had changed. The ranch had grown to over 300 acres now, with a herd of nearly 100 cattle and thriving secondary operations. The pecan orchard produced reliably every year, and Elena had expanded into selling preserved fruits and baked goods at markets throughout the region. They employed several full-time hands and had built a second house for the foreman and his family. Vincent was 53 years old in 1901, his hair more gray than brown now, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. His hands were gnarled from years of hard work, and he moved a bit slower than he used to. But he was healthy and strong, still capable of a full day's work, still the man Elena had chosen to stand beside all those years ago. They sat on the porch one evening in early September, 19 years after the fire that had changed their lives. The house had grown over the years, expanded and improved until it bore little resemblance to the simple adobe structure they had first built. Now it had a wide, covered porch that ran the length of the front, perfect for sitting and watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. "You remember what day it is?" Elena asked, rocking gently in her chair. Vincent thought for a moment, then nodded. 19 years ago tonight, I stood and watched everything I owned burn to the ground. And I stood with you," Elena said. "And the next morning I told you we would rebuild this dream together from ashes." "You did," Vincent agreed. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlocking automatically. "We did. More than rebuild," Elena said, looking out at the ranch spread before them. The main house, the barn, the outbuildings, the orchards, the cattle grazing in the distance, the smaller house where Victor and Catherine lived with their 2 children. "We built something bigger and better than what was lost, and we did it together." "I could not have done any of this without you," Vincent said. "You know that, do not you?" "I know you could have done it," Elena said. "Eventually, but it would have taken longer and been much harder and probably a lot less fun." Vincent laughed at that. Their life had been many things over the years, hard, challenging, exhausting, unpredictable. But it had also been fun, filled with laughter and love and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. "I love you," he said simply. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can put into words." "I know," Elena said. She turned to look at him, her face still beautiful to him despite the lines of age and experience, her eyes still holding that spark of determination that had first drawn him to her. "I love you too. I have loved you since that first night, when you stood in front of the fire looking lost, and I realized I could not imagine my life without you in it. I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die and probably after that too." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Victor calling to the cattle, the sound carrying clear across the evening air. From inside the house came the clatter of Rose doing dishes, home for a visit from her teaching position. It was the sound of family, of life continuing, of the legacy they had built together. "We should tell the story more," Vincent said suddenly. "About the fire and how we started over. The grandchildren should know it, should understand what their grandmother did." "What we did," Elena corrected automatically. "It is not my story alone, Vincent. It never was. We rebuilt together, remember, together," Vincent agreed. But he knew the truth he suspected Elena knew too, but was too generous to insist upon. She had been the one to stay when leaving would have been easier. She had been the one to offer partnership when he had nothing to give. She had been the strength when he was weak, the hope when he was despairing, the foundation upon which everything else was built. He had worked hard, yes, had given his sweat and blood to rebuilding the ranch. But Elena had given her faith, and that was worth more than all the labor in the world. They grew old together, Vincent and Elena, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under their guidance and later under Victor's capable management. Sarah's husband became a successful educator, eventually becoming principal of the San Elizario school. Henry returned from his adventures and settled down, marrying late but happily and starting his own ranch to the north. Rose taught for 30 years, influencing generations of children, before retiring and writing a book about the history of the region that became required reading in local schools. Vincent lived to see his 72nd birthday, still mentally sharp though his body had finally begun to fail him. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm spring night, with Elena beside him in the bed they had shared for nearly 40 years. His last words to her, whispered in the darkness, were simple. "Thank you for everything, for staying." Elena lived another 6 years without him, missing him every day but grateful for the life they had built and the family they had created. She died surrounded by her children and grandchildren, in the house she and Vincent had built together, on the land they had saved and nurtured. Her last words were for Vincent, spoken to the air as if he might hear her wherever he was. "I am coming. Wait for me. We have more dreams to build." They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside San Elizario, under matching headstones that their children commissioned. Vincent's stone bore the dates of his birth and death, and beneath them a simple inscription: "He built from ashes." Elena's stone matched, with one difference in the inscription. She stayed, and they rebuilt together. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down through Victor's line, each generation adding to what had come before while honoring the foundation that Vincent and Elena had laid. The story of the fire and the rebuilding became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they had come from and what was possible when two people refused to give up on each other or their dreams. The wildflowers that Elena had planted over the site of the original house continued to bloom every spring, a riot of color that marked the spot where it had all begun. Sometimes visitors to the ranch, seeing that unexpected garden in the middle of the working land, would ask about it. And whoever was asked would smile and tell the story: how a cowboy lost everything in a fire, how a woman stayed and said they would rebuild together from ashes, and how that promise became the foundation of everything that came after. It was a love story, yes, but more than that. It was a story about partnership and perseverance, about choosing each other even when circumstances made that choice hard, about building something meaningful from nothing. It was the story of Vincent and Elena Dalton, and it lived on long after they were gone, an enduring testament to what two people could accomplish when they faced the world together with determination, faith, and love.